Hello, and welcome to Executive Insights. In this episode, I spoke with Peter Carr from the University of Waterloo. Peter teaches at the Department of Management Sciences, and he runs a number of interesting programs connecting students with the business world, and also helping organizations to retrain their existing workforce. In this episode, we talked about the topic of talent and how the pandemic has impacted the way we approach learning and teaching. Thanks for joining me today.
It's good to be here, Nasheen, and thank you for taking the time to listen to what I've got to say.
You're very welcome, and it's my pleasure. So, Peter, your work at the University of Waterloo is very interesting because I think to a large extent, it sort of bridges the divide between the academia and the business world, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess it does. I think it's an interesting question about whether the academic and business world have a divide between them. I think a lot of people think they do, and of course they shouldn't, because the whole purpose of academia is that we're helping to make the world better, and the business world being part of that. And of course, most of us in the universities, I think, would like to think that what we do is trying really to do that. In the work that I do, I'm especially interested in how we can use technology to do that effectively, and I use that inside my courses. So I've worked with technology in education for a very long time. I thought about it the other day, and it's like 35 years. It's ridiculously long. But at Waterloo, we're able to leverage those technologies, especially around how organizations use technology themselves. So I'm really interested in how organizations use technology generally, and enabling them to improve their performance and be better organizations. But I'm also interested in how we use it in teaching. So the two together, I think, work quite nicely. And I focus on areas like project management, operations, and supply chain, innovation, and also I look at technology and society. So I think today I'm really lucky because technology is changing really quickly, and I'm able to think about what those changes mean, think about how they can be exploited for the benefit of organizations and society, and then help them do that. So I can't imagine a better job.
Yeah, you certainly sound like you have a very interesting spectrum of things that are keeping you busy. So the topic of talent has come up over and over again in our CIO conversations. How can organizations best leverage your initiatives to fill their talent gaps?
I think the one of the important things for organizations today is to get access to people with the skills that are going to help them in the changes that they're trying to make, which of course are especially important with COVID. It was all organizations were already facing large challenges as a result of technology in most areas, or most organizations were facing challenges. And then COVID came along and accelerated that. And so getting access to that talent is important. How they can work with us is through establishing activities that enable them to work with students while students are still at university, and to form early relationships that can allow them to benefit from the knowledge and skills that the students have now, but also identify people that they might want to continue working with to recruit perhaps in the future. But what we do is to use technology to work on projects that we hope will help students to learn about technology-based change, and at the same time benefit the organizations that those students are working with. And so one of the ways we do that has been to establish groups of students who will work on a particular problem or a particular objective that an organization has. And we've done lots of these in the past where We've looked at the introduction of technology in a particular area. We've considered, the application of data analytics and artificial intelligence. We've looked more broadly at what organizations might do with technology. And we've done a lot of that. And I think for most of the organizations, I think all of them that we've worked with, just the outside view and the advice that the students are able to provide has been beneficial to them. But the other thing I should mention as far as working with universities, at Waterloo we have co-op. We were one of the first organizations in the world to establish co-op programs. That's an ideal opportunity for organizations to get a concentrated period with one or more students coming to work with them full time. They have to pay them, as they should. They're working, they should get paid. But co-op's very popular. The organizations that do it have done it for years, a lot of them. And that's something that, if organizations that are watching this are not aware of co-op, they really should look at that.
Thank you, Peter. That's really, really helpful information. And in fact, I can speak first-handedly that we at the IT Media Group took advantage of one of your student programs a couple years ago, and it was truly a win-win situation. We leveraged a team of engineering talent to help us with one of our research projects. And I can tell you till this very day, a couple of them are still keeping in touch with us, and we've over the years provided some mentoring and also acted as their references for employment. So it's definitely paying dividends here. So it's a win-win situation for sure. And speaking of talent gap, I think COVID-19 has brought a couple things into focus. So first is digital technologies are allowing organizations to continue with working from home models in many situations, and also making hiring managers realize that the talent selection is no longer just location dependent in many cases. So it gives them greater flexibility. On the other hand, the economic situation has definitely had an impact on individuals seeking employment, especially new grads. What's your advice to both organizations who might be reshaping their talent strategy to meet their cost-saving mandate, as well as individuals, in particular new grads, who might be finding themselves all of a sudden in a tougher position competing for employment?
I mean, you mentioned at the start of that question, people working at home and being able to collaborate and work with each other at a distance. And of course, we're learning an awful lot more. People are doing a lot more of that now. And using that as part of organizations' talent acquisition strategies is of course, something they can do more today. Working with us on projects where we're working remotely with organizations, where groups of students work with organizations now all over the world, and that of course is a way for them to establish those types of relationships. They can involve people as interns more than they've done before when they're working with them at a distance, and at the same time, as far as new graduates and people who are struggling in the job market, perhaps, they should be offering their services on a virtual basis too. It's possible for them to make contact with organizations, to offer their help, even if that help is remote. And I think the important thing is that the world is changing very quickly, as I think everyone knows. And so, and for many organizations, this might mean that the difficulties they face today, because of the constraints that COVID is placing on them, mean that they may decide that they're going to wait until things return to normal and assume that things will pretty much go back to the way they were. And for most organizations, that's not really going to be the case. They really need to think right now about what the future is going to be like, and to be making the preparations, establishing the relationships with people, doing everything they can to prepare for whatever that new world is going to mean for them. So I think it's not simply a case of using virtual communication and forming of virtual relationships, because that's something the world needs right now generally. Organizations specifically themselves really should be preparing for the world that's coming. We already know that many businesses are not going to be here at the end of COVID. The data is already there that's telling us that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we're in the stage 3 of the reopening in Ontario. And I think we've all experienced to a certain degree, or have at least witnessed, that the pandemic has changed the way we approach learning and teaching. And right now, quite frankly, there are a lot of concerns out there from the educators, parents, and students about the uncertainties and how that might continue to impact learning being delivered in a safe and effective way. So I'm curious about your perspective about the hybrid learning model offered by the universities. And do you see that as a challenge or opportunity for the educators, and why?
A really interesting question. And, universities have been through a process which is similar to what a lot of businesses have been through. We came to a point when COVID, the lockdown started, and all of a sudden things had to move online. And that's happened for lots of businesses. And and that meant that the change that took place at that point was not ideal. If we were advising companies on how to introduce a large technology-based change, this would have been the last thing we'd have told them to do. Don't just cut over on 2 days' notice to suddenly have everybody online. So universities are probably doing the best they can with that, just as organizations are also, trying to survive. But what that's meant is that we've got a lot of things going on. Teachers that have never used online before are struggling, some of them, to be able to teach their classes and provide what students legitimately expect is a good quality education. And as we've moved through the spring term at Waterloo, and now we're looking towards the fall, we're trying to learn from that initial experience and to improve on what will come later. I think one of the big things, though, is that if we step back from COVID, technology was already challenging the way we did things in universities. It provides lots of opportunities to do things better than we did them before, to enable people to have much better experiences around their learning in working with companies, as I do with a lot of my courses, but also to have a better educational experience. We can record lectures, we can broadcast them to people remotely. We can provide people with access to knowledge in all sorts of different ways. I mean, one of the things I've always been critical of is that, some of us, I don't necessarily include me, are good at presenting in a live lecture classroom and can, keep people's attention for a long period, but most people can't. And there are much better ways, there have been for a long time, of presenting information. We have video, we have online, other means of presentation. So, I think technology was already providing a lot of opportunities to do things better. And as with other organizations, I think we're now understanding that a little bit better, and will be changing what comes afterwards in ways that might be better for students who already were in a position where their experience or aspects of their student life could be significantly improved. Student debt is a major issue. We can't carry on doing this, having students run up large amounts of debt. And of course, with online capabilities, there ought to be ways to improve on that. people should be able to work more maybe while they're at university. At the same time, being able to provide people with better work-related skills through working more closely with organizations while they're doing their degrees is something we should have been able to perhaps to have done more already on our use of technology. The aspect which usually is raised in all this is about the social interaction, and that's what I also hear from students, is that they don't have a problem with their classes being online, most of them. The thing that they miss is getting away from their parents, going into dorm, and forming all the networks and relationships and maturing, growing up, and the things that come from being away, living away from home and being in a university community. It's harder to replace that online, and there are things that we could talk about with that, but I think technology has the potential to greatly improve the educational experience. And it's good that what we're going through now is pushing universities to do more of it, partly because at the end of the day, if they don't, there are companies out there now who are going to provide for some of these needs. Education's potentially could be disrupted quite substantially. And maybe this will help us move forward to ensure that education remains something that people can expect good quality from.
Yeah, so definitely it's a opportunity. And, I always believe where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity anyway. And Peter, in your ongoing collaboration with the business world, you've been working with many senior leaders across the industries. What would be your word of advice for them as they continue to navigate through the uncertainties?
I think it is that they need to take a scientific approach to what they do. But with COVID, what we try to do is to look at the data that we have, understand, with the experience that happens elsewhere in the world, and establish processes and ways of behaving that we know are going to work as far as the virus is concerned. It's a scientific approach. As far as businesses dealing with their uncertainty is concerned, we have that knowledge now as well. We know what works for organizations to manage projects effectively. We know half of organizations don't use a coherent, consistent methodology to manage their projects. So, there's one thing they can do simply in order to manage their change more effectively. Use a scientifically proven approach to managing your projects. It's the same with innovation in organizations. We have a lot of knowledge now on what works for organization and what for innovation and what doesn't. We also know about improving performance in organizations. What are the things that organizations can do in order to make their operations work more effectively and to deal with a rapidly changing market? We have techniques to study markets, to understand what the main factors are that they should be considering in their strategic development. We know the processes they should go through in order to develop effective strategy and to implement those strategies. Those things we know how to do. And I think that as organizations look forward and consider what they're going to do with technology, with how their markets may be changing after COVID, that many were already changing before COVID, I think it's important to emphasize, use proven knowledge, take advantage of education, and take a measured, careful approach to what you do. This is not a time to rush out and say, okay, the future is very uncertain, we've got to make big gambles. It's not about gambling, it's about very carefully planning. And that's the message I would have. I think as people, are concerned about what the future might hold, now is the time to really, take a calm, measured, careful approach. It's more important than ever that we do what we know works, as opposed to, gambling and hoping for the best.
Absolutely. So taking calculated risks and making data-based decisions. And I think it's, what you're recommending here, which I absolutely agree. So thank you, Peter, so much for your insights and perspectives. And this is another episode of Executive Insights by the IT Media Group. Thank you for tuning in.